Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Bamboo Chalupa Digital Marketing Podcast. As always, I am your host, Brett Snyder, the owner of Knucklepuck, and I'm joined by Nate Shiver, the author of shiverweb.com.
Howdy.
So our listeners from the last episode will remember that Nate and I actually realized now 22 episodes in, we hadn't really given our listeners kind of a background and understanding of us personally, kind of our career, how we got into digital marketing, why we care so much about this industry that we want to sit down and publish a podcast every 2 weeks for it. And so we wanted to be able to give you guys an introduction as to who we are and kind of what motivates us, what keeps us passionate about the work that we do. Last week, we had the opportunity to hear all about Nate's career, the way that, he started from a very non-traditional path, working at a lumber company. He's done plumbing. He's done everything from agency work down to, now into the publishing side of things. We got to learn a lot about what makes Nate extraordinary and what allows him to be so successful in the publishing business and in digital marketing in general.
Yeah, and so this week we're going to sit down with Brett. And Brett, as you mentioned in the intro, you are the president of Knucklepuck. It is an agency that you started, and you have had more of a traditional career path. You were at Villanova and you worked your way up. Could you tell us a little bit about your career path and how you've made your way through the agency world to where you're at now?
Sure, and kind of as you mentioned there, so I have worked exclusively in agencies, in digital marketing agencies, really, for the entirety of my career. I first started working while I was still in college. I was actually working for an agency that helped manage Speedo's paid media campaign during the Summer Olympics. And so that was kind of my indoctrination into this business, seeing these multi-million-dollar ad spends, seeing the changes that I'm going to make. Not only can I go to Google and see what's actually happening with them, I also see how these ads are actually generating sales, that people are able to make money, that Speedo is able to go out there and spend millions of dollars to make millions of dollars more. When that was kind of my introduction to this industry, again on the PPC side of things, I actually got my first job in SEO, and fun fact, I did not even realize what SEO was or that it was what I was being hired for. I showed up for my first day at an agency called Sear Interactive in Philadelphia, which anybody who's been around digital marketing for a while knows that Sear and Will Reynolds in particular are a very, very well-known brand, and I was there I believe I was the 8th person there, but I thought I would be doing PPC. I came in and I thought that I would actually be doing PPC for Sear, and that was all I knew. It was my limited experience. But from there, I started off as kind of an SEO associate and account manager. Was able to learn everything from the client side to the technical on-page, off-page execution of SEO campaigns. From there, I actually moved down to Atlanta in 2012. My wife attended Emory Law School. My now wife attended Emory Law School, so we moved down for her to pursue her law career. It's where Nate and I met at Nebo Agency in West Midtown, Atlanta. I was on the SEO team there. By the time I left, I was director of the SEO team. And then we moved back up to outside Washington, D.C. about a year and a half ago, when my wife, again, we moved for Ann, doing a lot of moving for Ann here, but we moved back up to the D.C. area so she could take a job with the Department of Health and Human Services. And at that point, it had always been a dream of mine to be able to start my own business. And since the agency world is really where all of my experience was, it was a natural transition for me to go from working in the agency to freelance clients, now turning into something more formalized as I kind of build out my team and, and really kind of keep the whole agency life alive in terms of the course of my career.
So you mentioned where Speedo indoctrinated you into digital. Was there a moment where, especially at Sear, where you ended up on the SEO team, where you really fell in love with SEO and was thinking, this is the channel that I want to work in?
Yeah, so it was actually interesting. The thing that appeals to me most about SEO is actually the technical side of things, which is unusual because I don't have any sort of computer science or technical background. I've never, I can read HTML, I can read code, I can't write it. And it was something where I never had any formal training in it, but just that whole idea that there was an optimal way for a website to be crawled by a search engine was always something that was fascinating to me. I don't even know what the individual client would have been, but I remember the technical audits being one of the first things that we did at the start of our SEO campaigns. And I remember after I had done 3, 4, 5, 6 of them, every single technical audit was different. Every site had its own set of challenges, but you were still trying to fit it around the constructs of how a search crawler can find and access and evaluate your information. And so once I started to be able to see how much growth you can drive for a business simply by making it more accessible to the search engines, from there, everything else kind of rolled downhill in terms of, being able to do quality keyword research, how that influences the on-page strategy, how everything kind of fits together. Your internal linking, some people call that a technical strategy. Some people call it an on-page strategy. Some people call it a content strategy. It's really all the same. And I kind of built on that almost like I build our SEO campaigns at Knucklepuck now, where you build off a strong technical foundation. That's how I was able to really grow my understanding of this industry and really appreciate how much value and the unprecedented opportunity that the search engines provide to help businesses connect with their consumers.
Yeah, I know when you hired me at Nebo, that was one of the biggest things that you taught me was how SEO is so integrated, how everything builds on top of each other. It's not something where you do a technical audit and that it's done.
And you talk about it, it translates through to the way that you want to run any campaigns, where it can't just be about write this content. The content has to align with not only the user experience, but it has to make sense in your site. If you took one of the best posts on shiverweb.com and I threw it on my personal site, which is really about vacations that I take or, things that are little side projects to do with my friends, it wouldn't make as much sense because you have to see the forest for more than the trees. You can take something where it has to be the quality or the perceived quality of anything you're going to publish to your website is viewed on its own independent value, but it's also viewed as a product of the overall site. And how it's impossible to separate out these different elements of SEO, and it's something where it's just a constantly moving puzzle. You can almost equate it to trying to navigate your way through Hogwarts with all the moving staircases, where eventually where you want to go, but you may not ever take the same path to get there twice, and that doesn't mean that one was any more or less successful than the other. It just means you can't be expecting to follow the same footprints every time. You have to have an appreciation for where you want to go. You have to have your eyes on that destination and be able to do what it takes to be able to reach that destination through whatever means are at your disposal.
Well, speaking of building campaigns, you've now been at 3 different agencies and then now you're building your own. What are some of the lessons that you've seen at your first one and then at Sear and then Nebo that you're now trying to apply to your own agency?
Sure. And so one of the big things, and this is something that I learned at Sear, is all of the account managers, all of the people who are the strategists for the SEO campaign, were also client facing. And I think that that's something that is, for me, something that is integral. I tell that to people that I hire, that you need to have an ability to communicate your strategy directly to the client and understand how that client makes money. You have to understand how how you can communicate with them in the way that they can optimally receive that information. Where if you can send somebody a long, detailed document, that may be overwhelming to them, or you can call with a phone call. You can break it up into smaller documents. Having that understanding of the client relationship beyond just the SEO side of things is really what I think separates great agencies, because it is still something where it is at its core, it's still a consulting business. It's consulting on a very specialized skill, but you have to have the ability, and Nate, you touched on this when we spoke with you last episode. You have to be able to communicate what it is that you want. You have to execute on the strategy, because the best strategies in the world are completely useless if they're not executed and they're not implemented properly. You need to be able to know how to communicate with the resources to get what you want. You need to be able how to generate and buy-in from key stakeholders in that business to help them understand, hey, look, you gotta, and especially in SEO, there's a certain degree of you gotta trust me, where you're not gonna see the results of this for maybe 6 weeks or more. But you have to be able to communicate throughout that process what you are doing and what the intended result is, so that you can always keep the client focused on the fact that this is going to be a sustainable way for you to grow your business, but it requires a pretty significant investment to be able to get that flywheel moving. I continue to use that. Nate, you actually introduced me to that concept of the flywheel, where that first rotation is so much more difficult because you're going with zero momentum. And after that first one, it's still going to be tough to get that second rotation, but it's a little bit easier. And then the third one gets a little bit easier from there. And it starts to build on itself, and you start to generate that self-sustaining momentum. But you have to have that ability to communicate with your clients and view yourself as I view myself, and I encourage all of my people who work on my team to do the same, where we are an extension of our client's team, where we are not something where we are just the agency that you outsource work to. We want to understand the challenges that you're going through on a business side. We want to understand the margins on your products, because we may say that, hey, there's so much more search volume on this one term, but this other one makes so much more money to the business, or this one subset of your products maybe is a whole lot more expensive. And if we can sell those, we would generate more money. But on the other side of things, if we are able to drive more sales on this particular product, we're going to generate more profit. And understanding exactly what it is that your client uses to define the return on their investment in SEO is something that I think is really essential for anybody in a consulting capacity to understand, and something that I have held as an integral part of the way that I've built Knucklepuck, and the way that as we continue to grow and scale, that is one of those core fundamental aspects that I have not and will not ever compromise on.
No, I like that. I wish that more agencies in the SEO industry would take on that approach, just because right now it seems like you have your SEO guy, or you have your SEO agency, or you have your link building agency. It's never integrated. And
you have, where all of a sudden it's like, all right, well, we didn't see any organic growth. And then it's like, well, I sent you this document. And then it just kind of sat there to die. And it happens, we laugh about it, but it happens more than you would expect, even being in the industry, where that if something, you can't optimize a website without optimizing the website. I can send you a 200-page strategy document, but if that never goes from strategy document to changes to your website, that is no better than, I would rather have a one-page document with tactical action items than a 200-page detailed strategy that we cannot execute on.
Well, on that note, let's talk about what has been your most challenging project.
So I've worked in a lot of different industries over the course of my career, and everything from e-commerce, B2B, software as a service. I've done things with small mom and pop shops and Fortune 50 and Fortune 100 companies. I think one of the real challenging things for me has been I've worked in industries that are, we'll conservatively say, overwhelmingly black hat, where, industries like Payday Loans or industries like mesothelioma, where you have people where the consumer at the end of the day is very often being taken advantage of by these companies and by these businesses that really just want to make a quick buck at the expense of somebody who is suffering from maybe a very significant financial burden or a medical issue. And being able to understand that there are white hat ways to do that. There are businesses that want to be able to provide this service in a way that is going to be able to have an understanding of what does the end user need, to be able to say this is going to actually benefit you, and I want to give you the right information to make an informed decision. I want to make sure that you can understand what it is that you're signing up for and maintain these ethical principles. But I think working in some of those industries that are overwhelmingly black hat, where people are willing to, for Payday Loans, for example, or I don't know how true this is anymore. It's been a number of years since I've worked in that, and the industry has gotten admittedly much seedier since I've been involved in it.
Google even rolled out an update specifically for the payday loan industry.
And so this was 5+ years ago. But being able to look at that, where a number one ranking for that term can generate about $80,000 in revenue a day. Day for that. And so people will say, hey, if I rank number one for a day, and we talked about this with our Black Hat episode, if it takes me 50 grand to rank for one day, you still make 30 grand and then they're out. And they don't care who that they have to climb over to get there. And I think being able to understand how far people are willing to go in SEO and in digital marketing to be able to make a buck for themselves at the expense of the consumer has really opened my eyes to be able to recognize how to find the right clients, help to make sure that we are going to want to be an extension of that team and have industries and businesses that we want to work with. I think that's been one of the more challenging things for me, just from a standpoint that I want to make sure that we retain that kind of ethical approach to it. But I also think there's a lot that can be learned in these industries. I think there's a lot that can be learned from a black hat approach, as we talked about. I think there's a lot that can be learned from these ultra hyper competitive spaces that really will translate through to the other clients and the other strategies. Again, we can't follow the same footprints, but we can start to follow the same path or understand how to find the clearing that we need to be able to drive sustainable success regardless of the industry.
It's interesting that you talk about clients across all of these industries, including some that have a bad reputation. And I was just thinking, what what does make a winning client for you? You know, when someone sends you an RFP or whatnot, when you see a client send that over, what makes you think this is going to be a win? Like, we can work together. This is going to be a success.
So this is going to sound maybe a little shocking, but I think I don't want a client that sends me an RFP. Because a client, to me, if you have an RFP, or if it's an RFP process that is simply just, here it is, you answer these questions and we're going to pull from there, that's not an ideal client for me. No, I'm not saying I've never filled out an RFP. I have. I'm not saying I never would. I will. But there has to be some understanding of what that relationship's going to be with the people who are responsible for implementing things on the client side. You know, an ideal client for me is, I'm still optimizing your website. You have to have a product or a service that is worth buying. You have to have a product or a service that is, that we are able to optimize for. SEO is not going to take a bad business model and make it successful. It can, but maybe not in the long-term sustainable fashion, and not a client that I see is going to be a good long-term partnership for me and the agency. So I want to make sure that the business that we're working in maintains ethical, principles, that they're willing to, turn away more money if it means compromising the values of the business. I think it has to be something where I believe, my team believes, and the business believes that the product or service that they're providing is something that provides a legitimate value to the consumer or to the audience. And I think it's also something where there has to be a mutual sign of respect. One of the biggest things that people in the agency world will complain about is that they come home. It's like, oh, I had a 2-hour call with a client and they just berated me for 2 hours. And to me, absolutely not. That's one of those things where then it means my team doesn't want to come into work. I don't want to come into work. We don't want to really drive success for the client because they don't treat us with the respect that we deserve. They view us as just somebody that is, we just answer we respond to them. They say jump, we say how high. And I think that there needs to be more of a cohesive relationship there. I think the best clients that I've had, and all of my projects run on 30-day rolling retainers. Meaning that if a client is unhappy either with me personally, with the results that we're generating, they are not locked into a long-term contract. And I've had clients since the first day that I started freelance work that are still on these 30-day rolling retainers because we have that mutual relationship. And I think that's one of those things that allows me to be able to put the work and the time and effort in, because especially with SEO, there may be times where I've gotten calls at 10 o'clock at night and it's been not, why wasn't this done? It's, oh my God, something happened and I don't know how to fix it. And those, to have those calls and know that that is going to be something that may occur, you want to have that relationship to know that, oh man, like I have to help you. I want to help you with this. Let's fix this. Let's get this done as quickly as possible. And I think that to me, having a strong relationship with your clients on a professional, but also on a personal level, allows me and my team to stay invested in that project, and it helps prevent burnout when you know that you're on the same team, you're working towards those same goals, and we win together, we lose together.
The word you used earlier when you were talking about your marketing campaigns was sustainable. I think that word is also applicable here when you're talking about choosing the right client and developing the right relationships.
If you want to have those sustainable relationships where everybody knows that, hey, we are going to be successful together, or we are going to fail together. And I don't like to fail. I hate it. It keeps me up at night. But I know that for me to avoid failure, that I need to have a certain degree of control over what is going to be implemented, how things are going to be run. And not to say control where it must be done my way, but that we actually have the capacities to implement things, that we can go in there and know that if we need X, Y, and Z to happen, that we collectively as a team between Knucklepuck and our clients, that we collectively have the tools to do that, and we also have the drive and the resources and the understanding to accomplish it.
Well, let's talk about failures. I mean, I don't like the cliche about people learning so much from failures, but I do think that it's good to know what are some areas to avoid, and what are the failures that you've had and some takeaways that you've taken from them.
Right, and I agree with you that it's kind of the cliche there, yeah. But I truly stand by that. Some of the biggest things that I've built as fundamental aspects of Knucklepuck have been things I've looked at from various agencies, that from colleagues, from friends, and anything like that, where I say, I just don't want that to happen. Things like burnout. Like, I make sure that I can say, hey, if we have, if our team is expected to be 100% billable or more, that is not going to happen. Like, that's just setting yourself up for failure. And so I put caps and I say, if we're looking at, people being 50, 75% billable, we need to grow the team. And we can't wait for the fact, we need to have that understanding that sooner or later a big project might come in and we may have to sprint for a couple of weeks, but you have to also realize that this is not something you can't sprint all the time. That, having as a manager and as somebody who, is now hiring managers as well, you have to have that understanding where a manager leads by doing and not by saying. That you have to know that the person that you're reporting to is somebody that understands what you're doing and is able to add value to you. That meetings need to be collaborative. That is, if one person is dominating the conversation, then it's not a meeting. We want to be able to make sure that we can focus on things. And these aren't necessarily failures. I'm redirecting a little bit, and we'll get back to the actual question. But redirecting a little bit just in the sense that, these are things where these are struggles that inhibit you from driving optimal results.
Oh, yeah.
And I think being able to have an understanding of that and know not only what you want to do to be successful, but what you want to avoid being unsuccessful are two things that are very, very important in terms of having a objective and a conscious understanding of the service you're providing and ways that it can be improved.
It can give you parameters.
It can. And it frames things for you. It helps you understand kind of what is it that I would need in that position, and it forces you to, walk a mile in somebody's shoes. It forces you as a manager to understand, it's like, hey, if I'm expecting my team, if I'm running numbers on my team and say, hey, it looks like we all have to bill 70 hours this week to be able to meet our retainers, then that's not a failure on my team when they come up short on a 70-hour billable week, not even a 70-hour week, but a billable week. That's a failure on my part as a manager for not putting my team in a position that they can be successful.
So what's a campaign? Let's shift gears to marketing campaigns that you've done. What's a marketing campaign that you've seen as a failure and has given you some of those parameters to keep in mind?
And I think a lot of that comes down to, when you talk about link building or off-page campaigns, especially ones that require a significant upfront investment. SEO in general, we even talked about this a couple minutes ago. SEO in general requires, one of the phrases that I like to use is SEO is an investment, not a cost. You have to be able to invest up front to be able to see that sustainable growth. Now, I've run projects where we've done all the research. We said, hey, I think people are really going to be interested in this. We've invested tons of money in producing a piece of content or some sort of an interactive tool. And then we go out there to do the promotion and we get no pickup. We had one a couple years ago. I worked for one of our clients they were called natural area rugs, where they were made with natural fibers, expensive, high-end products. And we put, I think it was something like 10 grand into actually putting together a link building campaign. We got them to be able to custom produce these, 8 by 10 foot rugs that were expensive, even just at cost. Or just the raw materials for it were extremely expensive. We wanted to do these giveaways, run through these, high value key influencer bloggers. And the strategy, looking back, was well researched and well constructed. But when we got to the actual execution on it, I think we got something like 4 links from, highest domain authority at something like 40. And it's, had to go back and tell clients, like, listen, it just didn't work. It should have, it didn't work. And, it's hard. And it's something where we learned a lot from that, being able to, how did we qualify these posts? How do we look at and say, hey, can we pre-qualify some of our campaigns before we start investing a lot of this money in it? Can you start to build relationships with these bloggers beforehand to say, I'd like to run a giveaway through your site? What are the terms for that? Is it something you'd be willing to open yourself up to? What is that going to be in terms of a cost? What types of, can I see some of the referral metrics we might be able to expect from similar campaigns that you've been involved in the past, so that we now know, we didn't necessarily know exactly what we had to look for in terms of criteria to say this should be successful. We went through, we said, hey, there's a lot of bloggers that write about this stuff. There's a lot of bloggers that go with this. Natural rugs are much more eco-friendly because it's almost, at the end of the day, if you wanted to throw away a $3,000 rug, you could put it in the compost heap. And it's something where they're very sustainable from a environmental standpoint. But being able to look at that and say, knowing that there are people who want to write about eco-friendly products is not enough. It has to be understand exactly what it is you're going to ask people and be able to generate buy-in before you invest so much money into it. And money, and even just beyond money, it was time, it was resources for our team, and just to be able to pre-qualify as much as you can and understanding the criteria that you should use to pre-qualify those ideas, I think was one of the the biggest things I learned. But yeah, I still remember that. It's still kind of, because like I said, I'm an extension of my client's team, and I've always felt that way. And when these campaigns come up short, I feel like I cost my money. Like I lost my money on this campaign. And it's something where all you can do at that point is try to learn from it, try to make sure that you don't make the same mistakes twice. But when mistakes happen, you can cry about it, or you can find a way to ensure that it never happens again.
No, I mean we've done entire episodes on this podcast about the idea of pre-qualifying and getting initial feedback before committing to something. I mean that's a lot of the concept behind agile SEO. I like that. Well, so Knucklepuck, you've grown it from being freelance to being now you're an agency with a team, growing client roster. Where do you see Knucklepuck in the next year, 5 years? Where do you want to take it?
So for me, I get this question a lot, where it's how big do you want the agency to be? And the answer is as big as it makes sense to be. I think that it's something where I would love to have 200 people in an office if it makes sense, and we can retain the same level of quality with those 200 people as we would with a smaller team. And now this is to say that I don't necessarily think that that's possible, at least not the way that I want to grow, but to grow in a very deliberate fashion, to know that the clients that I have now are going to receive the same level of service and attention as they would regardless of how big our team gets, regardless of how big the client roster gets. And so we are actively hiring. I'd love to be able to move in. Right now we only offer kind of SEO and digital PR. Would love to move in and start offering PPC services. I want to be able to have web design and development services potentially as a potential growth opportunity. Even looking into complementary media, where if we can stay, I think video is one of the things that is going to continue to grow in the next 5 years. And to be able to, the great part about SEO is that we are already on the bleeding edge, but to be able to have that sense like, all right, we've got a bit of a head start in terms of where marketing is going next. People didn't believe the internet was going to sustain, 15 years ago. They thought what Google was doing was just laughable. Now, all of a sudden, Google is synonymous with the internet almost. And I think for me, it's to make sure that we continue to maintain a focus on where our industry is going, where these emerging opportunities are, whether it's through video, whether it's through wearable technology. What's going to happen to advertising when wearable technology becomes, as pervasive as your mobile phone is right now. Being able to try to recognize that so that we can be proactive in terms of being able to authentically and legitimately provide a service for that, rather than just saying, oh, well, if everybody has Google Glass, I want to make sure that my brand name flashes across your eyes 5 times a day. That's not the approach that I want to take. But I also want to be able to recognize that, if people said, hey, cell phones, these big giant cell phones, nobody's going to walk around with that. And now how many, the vast majority of people have got a powerful computer in their pocket that is more powerful than what existed 15 years ago. I think being able to have a focus on where the industry is going and adapt to that, but also to make sure that there are those fundamental core values that I talked about that I'm unwilling to compromise on. And the team that I want to build around are people that understand those values, but that will also hold me to them. Where it's something where we know that if we're kind of considering a strategy that maybe we don't think is successful, or we're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole in terms of saying, hey, we've got the budget to do this, so we got it. They want this campaign, they gave us the budget for it, and to say, well, will this be successful? Will we give them an ROI on it? Because if they tell us to do a campaign and it is not successful, that is still going to be on us. And to know that we have those relationships, that we can maintain those relationships with our clients, that we can have a team that is excited to come into work every day, not only to work for Knucklepuck, but also to work for our clients, to understand those industries, to learn something new every single day, which I think is a quality that you and I, Nate, share, and something that has really been powerful in terms of how we've both pursued our parallel career paths, if you will, but just being able to say that there's always more that you can learn. And the one thing that I always tell everybody is, especially people that I hire, it's like, I can teach you SEO. I can't teach you to give a shit.
Right.
I can't teach you hustle. And I want, as we look 5 years down the road, that's the one thing that I want to make sure is still inherent to this agency, is that, focus on, I need to be able to out hustle everyone else, because there are very few barriers to entry to get into SEO. There are very few barriers to entry to, as a business, to be able to optimize for SEO. Publicly available information. The smartest, the most expert people in our field are the ones that do the most public speaking, do the most writing. I want to take that education aspect of it and help grow our industry as a whole so that people don't view SEOs as snake oil salesmen or people trying to manipulate the search results, and they start to view them as an opportunity to authentically engage businesses with consumers. And so I think that as the industry evolves, and the internet is not going away, as the industry evolves, I think as long as we can make sure that we remain focused on those fundamental values, that I will be happy doing this for as long as the industry will have me.
I love it. Well, if there's one takeaway for someone either getting into the industry or in the industry right now, what would it be?
There is nothing prohibiting you from being better than me. And that's what keeps me going. There is nothing that keeps any of our listeners from becoming a better SEO than me or a better SEO than you, Nate. There is nothing. You have all the tools at your disposal to go out there and really kill it in whatever industry you happen to be in. And now people like Nate and I both have to say, all right, we have to keep focused, we have to keep learning, we have to keep pushing ourselves to get better because somebody's coming for you. And I would encourage anybody that's considering SEO to recognize the fact that you have all of the resources at your disposal to go out there and take advantage of Google, of Yahoo, of Bing, to look beyond your traditional search engines and recognize what you can do on Amazon, or maybe looking for some of these complementary search engines, to start thinking about what it looks like on a mobile device versus not, to keep that hustle, keep that fire alive, because that's what makes our industry better. That's what pushes innovation, and that's what allows us as just a general culture to be able to have a better experience with digital. And I think that that's my advice to anybody here, is that you've got those tools available to you. You just have to make sure that you take advantage of them.
Awesome. Well, I will say, Brett, that, last episode when I was talking about where I was bouncing around and I needed to work for agency, and then I grew 10x at the agency, I will tell our listeners it was because I got to work for Brett. Brett was my director of SEO and really focused all of this scatterbrain craziness energy into saying, hey, this is how you should grow, this is where you should go. And so I'm kind of living proof that, you can go from bouncing around, into having a successful business on your own. And Brett, where can people reach out to you to find these resources that you speak of?
Sure. So you can find me on Twitter. It's Brett A. Snyder. You can also email me at brett@knucklepuckmedia.com, Brett with 2 T's. We're actually redesigning our website right now so that there will be more of kind of a formalized contact process in there. And if anybody is in the Northern Virginia, D.C., Maryland area and is interested in getting into SEO, we are hiring. And so feel free to shoot me a resume, shoot me a question. I would love to hear from anybody.
All right, do that. Brett@knucklepuckmedia.com, and follow Brett on Twitter @Brett A. Snyder. All right, well, you can find previous episodes, links to things that we mentioned, and our contact information at bamboochalupa.com. If you don't want to miss another episode, go subscribe to the podcast in iTunes or your favorite podcast app. And do leave a comment and rating while you're there. We learn a lot from your feedback, and your ratings help others to discover the show. So for Brett Snyder, I'm Nate Shiver. Thank you for listening.